Hello, folks. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you here after the summer break. And very happy to welcome today with us again Chris Compston, who will share his perspective on the product mindset. Chris, now you should be able to unmute yourself and share your video.
Cool, great. Yeah, let's get going. Just let me share my screen. Cool, okay. I'll assume everyone can see it. Just shout me if you can't. Thank you so much again to Alex. This is my second time speaking at this event, and it's really nice to see you all again. So yeah, let's get cracking. So I really want to pose a question to start us off, and feel free to use the chat. I won't be looking during the talk, but feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts on the answer to this question as I pose it. It'll be really interesting to get some feedback to see where everyone's mind's at, given that we all work within product development. So that question I want to pose to you today is, how do you define a high-performing product team? Now, the way I think about this is in this sense, and this is the way that I talk to my colleagues and my clients that I work with, is that a high-performing product team is one that can say, we consistently get things to our customers that they value enough to pay for. So what does that mean? It means essentially that our teams, in other words, are both efficient and effective. We're able to get things to our customers, whether they're experiments, features, new product launches, new services, changes to the products that we might have, evolutions. We're able to get it to them in an efficient way, and we're also able to be effective. I'm going to dig into a little bit of both of these concepts now. When we think about product operations, which is a place that I've been living in for the past 5 or so years, and maybe even a little bit longer, or if we're thinking about the world of really anybody who's focusing on how product teams work, we're often tasked with focusing on efficiency. And that's something I've been questioning quite recently and quite often. I'm really trying to wonder why we actually always focus on efficiency, getting things to customers faster. And I say getting things to customers faster because usually the people that are tasking us with or making us accountable for thinking about efficiency are usually our key stakeholders, whether they're in the product development world, whether they're in the business world or the sales, the marketing world. People talk about speed. People talk about how quickly we can get things to customers. And I try to wonder why that might be. And I often come back to this triangle. This triangle is something that, as a consultant, I used to talk to my clients about, and the consultants themselves would discuss internally about our clients, because quite often decisions came down to a simple thing, just like this triangle. On each corner of this triangle, and you may recognize this as the golden triangle. Sometimes people call it the iron triangle of project management, actually, but it can actually really be easily applied to product development as well. In the bottom left corner, we have good. So what does good mean? Good means high quality. Good means something our customers want. Good means performant, means safe, means secure, means accessible. At the top, we have fast or efficient or speed. How quickly can we get these things to our customers? And at the bottom, we have a cost factor. So is it cheap? Now, the reason I use the word cheap, good, and fast is that this is really what our business stakeholders talk about. When they come to us and say, can we be more efficient? They mean fast. Can we think about how much this costs? They mean they want it cheaper. Can we think about improving or increasing the scope of a particular feature or experiment to make it good, to make it better for our customers? The reality is, when we look at this triangle, you can only pick two. You can only have two of these things. As an example, if you want things that are good and fast, they're sure not going to be cheap. Usually it's the most expensive way to go. You might have to hire in external consultants, experts in a field that can build good things, and they can build them really quickly. So we can't really get cheap in this sense. It's only going to cost us money. The next example is if we want things fast and we want things cheap. Well, really, they're not going to be that good. If we do things really quickly and we do it on the cheap, corners are going to be cut. We're not going to really be thinking fully about accessibility and performance. And sometimes we're thinking about minimal viable product in this sense, but that's really just pulling on the fast lever again. How quickly can we get things to customers? It's not about descoping. We rarely talk about descoping unless we want to go faster. And finally, if you want good and you want cheap, Well, that's usually the slowest way to go. Building software products is complex, it's time consuming, requires expertise, requires money, requires investment and funding. If we want it to be a really great product that is accessible and performant and is achieving what customers want, then it sure as hell isn't going to be fast. But the reality is, when we think about the three corners here and which ones we want to play and which one we want to use as levers, the reality is that we just can't really talk about good or cheap in our product development teams. Even in some cases, product leadership, they are not the ones that hold the investment budget. They're not the financial controllers. They equally, dependent on the type of organization you work in, you might not also be able to play around with good. You may not be able to cut some of the corners, and the teams themselves don't even want to. Meaning that the only lever we can actually pull is the speed lever, the fast lever. Hence why teams like product operations, agile coaches, product leadership from a cross-functional perspective, and anyone else that's really thinking about how we're working has to think about efficiency, has to think about speed. And I think that does a slight disservice to the original high-performing team statement, which is getting things to customers quickly that they value, and they value so much that they will actually eventually pay for. I want us to consider this as a little bit of an analogy. It's a football analogy, so apologies for the fans out there that aren't fans of football. But I want you to consider this as the number of shots taken in a given time frame. So the number of shots taken, or let's just say features launched or experiments launched in a given time frame, let's say in a quarter, so in a 3-month period. All the shots that we take on goal have the potential of achieving what we said they might achieve earlier, that they get there quickly into the hands of our customers, and they're highly valued enough that they pay for them. Now, we know in product development, this is really quite a hard thing to do. And the stats out there at a high level are usually that 20 to 30% effective is really good, which means 70 to 80% of the things we launch, especially if we're in an experimental mindset and a company that allows us to experiment and learn, 70 to 80% of those are going to fail. And that's quite a scarily high number. And if you think it like this, in, let's say, again, in our quarter time period, we're able to take 5 shots on goal, which means, and we actually score 1 of these 5 shots. That is being 20% effective. So aligns with the stats and the metrics I just showed you. So this is what the reality of a product team actually looks like. That every quarter they're able to launch 5 things, and they may be small MVPs or experiments. They may be full product launches. Again, depends on the organization you're working in. And indeed, product teams may be able to increase this number. They may have less, they may have more. But for the purpose of this example, let's say 5 shots on goal, 1 of them is scored, makes us 20% effective. Now, if you actually look at the efficiency of our teams and double the efficiency now, that is really, really hard to do. And I'm sure a lot of people on the call have attempted to do this. It's really challenging to even move the dial slightly on efficiency. You can remove a lot of waste. You can make communication more effective. You can think about the velocity of a team and take some of those metrics and play around with how we build things, both in engineering, within QA, how we design, how we do research. Doubling efficiency is really hard, but again, for the purpose of the example, let's just say we have spent some time now thinking about efficiency, and we're now double. That means we've taken 10 shots and we've scored 2, because we're still only 20% effective. Now, in the real world, you might find that there's a bit of a fluctuation here. Maybe every other quarter we score a couple more or a couple less. But on average, we're just saying we're 20% effective. So really, there's only been 2 experiments, 2 product launches, 2 features, 2 evolutions of the product that we've made in the course of a quarter. They've actually landed with customers that they see valuable enough. And that brings us to the point that if we don't actually focus on being more effective, then the efficiency gains that we find, which are fantastic, we're doubling efficiency. This is actually quite incredible. And I really task anyone to say that they've been able to do that. But if we don't focus on being effective, then those efficiency gains, they're never going to be realized. And that's the challenge that we're faced with, especially when these teams, our product ops, our agile coaches, our product leadership teams, are tasked with and are accountable for finding those efficiencies. So what does it mean to be more effective? Well, using this analogy, what it means is that we want to score more goals from the shots we actually take. So let's go back. We've got our 5 shots and we've scored 1. But let's increase that. Let's now say of the 5 shots, we score 2. Now we're 40% effective. Going back to that example I gave earlier, again, this is relatively unheard of. But let's just use it for this example. We're now 40% effective with the original 5 shots we've taken. Before, we had to go up to 10 shots to get these 2 goals scored. Now it's still 5. The second, and even when we look at doubling efficiency, we're actually able to score 4 goals. We're now doubling both our efficiency and our ability to be effective, and have scored 4 goals with our 5 shots. The second part of that is actually learning from every shot we take, which includes the shots that we may have missed, the products that didn't quite land. Iteration, and we talk about this quite a lot in product development, is learning from the mistakes we made, or learning from the experiments that we hypothesized about and actually doing something about them. So again, let's take our 40% effective. We've been able to double efficiency and our effective levels are quite high. And we want to learn from as many of these shots as we can. The reality is we can't learn from everything for various different reasons. But let's just say we're able to learn from a few of the shots we scored and a few of the shots that we didn't score, the ones that missed, the ones that didn't find the type of value we were looking for. And value can be viewed in various different ways. Just for this example, the customer didn't find the value that they were looking for. They weren't willing to pay for it. They weren't willing to join the product. They weren't willing to stay around and use the product a bit longer. But learning something is only part way. And really what we need to do is apply those learnings. And if we, again, just look at, okay, these are the shots we've taken. These are ones we've learned from. If we stop there, then we actually still stay 40% effective. And we, again, in the next quarter, if we get to take 10 shots, we're assuming we'll score 4 of those, and that'll be 40% effective. But the reality is, from these learnings, we have to do something with them. And what we want to do is take one of those shots, and in the next quarter is actually move one of them and score it, and again land something for our customers that they want, making us 50% effective. Now, some of these numbers may seem a bit outlandish. A team that is able to experiment and having a 50% effective rate is, again, very challenging. But it's just to give you a perspective of thinking about efficiency and thinking about being effective. And if we are not effective, then our efficiency gains, they're really not going to hit the mark as much as we would like them to. Now, when we think about teams that are being effective, the teams themselves should be often thinking about this, and we have the concept of continuous improvement in Agile, so that those teams get together and discuss the changes they may want to make. And I think we know, or we should really know, that sustainable long-term change within a product organization can only really come through self-driven continuous improvement. Any top-down or even lateral force that comes into a team that says, we've identified you need to improve here, here, and here, and some are efficiency and some are more about being more effective, it's never really going to drive the sustainable change that's expected. And change management tells us this. We have to have self-driven, self-diagnosed continuous improvement. And there's an analogy I want to share as well, because we really need to give the teams the time and the space to really deeply think about how to be more effective. And of course, we have our Agile retros, and teams should be feeding back on a continuous basis as well. But actually carving out that time and space can often be a challenge. And I've certainly heard in the past product leadership coming to me and saying, we don't have the time, we just have to deliver. And the analogy I want to share here is we're spending no time thinking about sharpening our axe because we're cutting down the forest. Now, what that means is that if we continue to cut down the forest and not look after the tools we have, we're not going to be able to cut down any more forest in the future either. So these teams, they need the time and the space to sharpen their tools, to sharpen the way that they act together. And hopefully what I'm going to introduce to you today, this framework, is actually going to help them to do that, because it provides a space that they can objectively think about how they're operating from a perspective of being more effective. And this framework will help them to self-diagnose the challenges that they have and define their own improvements. And the reality is that finding highly effective teams is really hard. Number one, to find them and identify them and find them, but equally to scale them. And this framework should help somewhat towards that. What we really want to do here is to enable our teams to build strong product thinking mindsets that allow them to be effective at the same time that they're thinking about how they might improve their efficiency. So I will show you this framework now. And as you'd expect, this framework is actually looks kind of blank right now, but I will go through the details with you. It's simply a 9-box grid. And this 9-box grid that I'm calling the product capability matrix looks at a series of pillars. To be really product thinking, we need, as an organization, to be strategically aligned. right from the top, from the vision that our company founders and leaders have, all the way down to every individual in the team needs to be strategically aligned. They need to know why they exist. They need to know what they're achieving. Equally, we also need to be value driven. We really need to understand what value means to our customers so that we can actually drive more of it for them. And as we go back to that original statement, we want to drive that value for the customers because we believe that's what will help them to get over the barrier of paying for the services. As a business, we need customers to pay for things, and great experiences, great value add should equal money. Finally, we want to also be outcome focused. We really want to make sure that we're able to understand what outcomes that we're actually going for our customers. And equally, we need to be able to measure those as well. If we know what the outcomes are, but we're not able to actually measure them and understand them, once those shots are out there and they've been scored, then we'll not be able to move forward. Down on the left-hand side, we now have what I'm calling factors. So the factors are really simple. Firstly, we need to think about the business. And when I say that, I mean we have to think about how the business is strategically aligned, how the business thinks about value, how the business thinks about outcomes. Then we have customers. Again, where do customers feature on our strategy and within our vision? Do we understand the value that we can drive for them? Do we understand the outcomes that we'll see from them acting, behaving, and using our services and products so that we know that we're being successful? And finally, our approach. Does our approach allow, does our strategy and the alignment of our strategy allow for our approach to be autonomous? Does it allow for empowered teams? Do they understand the purpose of why they exist? Equally, value driven. Do they have enough iterative processes in place to allow them to understand value and to understand when they're learning about different values from different customers and where they might pivot? And finally, how are they outcome focused? And our approaches allow us to be more outcome focused. The 9-box grid then covers principles across each of these pillars. I won't go through all of these because we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into one of them now, but very highly, right at the top corner there, our business has to be strategically aligned. We need a long-term vision. Our customers need to feature on our strategy. So we do have to be user-centered. And for our teams to actually deliver on that vision, they have to be empowered, and that comes through the strategic alignment. So each of these principles is really important. Each of these principles is a product thinking principle. And if a team is able to say that they can do all of these and they're doing it really effectively, those teams are the best teams. Those teams are the high performing ones. They're the ones that are more innovative, more creative, the ones that are hitting the mark with their customers even more and are driving the product that they're working on forward. I wanted to zoom in a little bit because this, as it stands, is a very simple framework. But when we get down into the detail, you start to see the nuance and the conversations that might happen through this framework. I would absolutely say that a framework is just the starting point of a conversation. The true value of this is in the team getting together and questioning themselves, having an internal debate where they see themselves fitting across each of these principles, across each of these pillars and factors as well. That's where the real value is, not within the framework itself. The framework simply allows them to objectively structure that conversation, and the value lies within themselves. I want to zoom in a little bit into right in the center of this framework. So in the customer space, the customer factor, and thinking about the value-driven pivot, value-driven pillar. As you remember from the principles, that means that we are data-driven. And I'm sure a lot of your teams would like to say they're data-driven, or maybe they do say they're data-driven. The reality is that not all teams are capable of being, and not all organizations are capable of being. But it's something that we say because we believe it to be true. If we want to build things for our customers and we want to be value-driven, then we must be data-driven. The way that I want to frame this and the way that I want our teams to think about it is to use this framework and to say this sentence, this statement. This statement is really important, and it's one of those things that we talk about in product development within Agile. Repetition is really important, and our teams have to truly believe in this. If they want to be data-driven, they have to be able to say the statement, and every team member has to be able to say this. We believe in continuously striving to understand what our customer values, as opposed to relying on gut instinct. Therefore, we are data-driven. We can say we are data-driven so that we build the thing right. I just want to go down to the second point there because that's the antithesis of the original statement. Relying on gut instinct is not inherently bad. That's not a bad thing to do. We hire highly capable knowledge workers and they have gut instinct, but it doesn't overshadow the fact that we should be truly understanding customers and be data driven. And then we can lean on our gut instinct. If all we had was gut instinct, we'd be in a relatively bad place because we'd be making decisions with really no data or insight to back them up. So our teams need to be able to say this. And as a workshop using this framework, the team themselves have to sit down, read this out, and really agree to it. And if they don't agree to it, then that's another conversation that needs to be had, another debate that needs to be had. But if we want to build the right thing, we need to be data driven. We shouldn't be relying on our gut instinct, and we should really be striving to understand our customers and what our customers value. And how we do that is open to interpretation, is open to different organizations. The second part of this zoomed in part of the framework, and just to be really clear, if we think back to the 9-box grid, every single principle in there has this exact same structure with different content, of course. When we then break down further into the framework, we then ask the teams to consider the different levels that they might be at with a set number of criteria that they themselves define. I'm going to use a couple of examples here to really get you to understand what different levels might look like. Level 1 going all the way up to level 5 being the highest. You may question, why does this say level 1, level 3, level 5 and not 1, 2, and 3? That's on purpose. It's on purpose because we want teams to be challenged with thinking, am I a level 1 or am I actually in a level 3? It's really easy to go, I'm a level 2, not a level 1. That's quite an easy jump to make. But a harder jump is going from level 1 to level 3 and then finally up to level 5. There should be a real difference and a distinct difference between these things. And they should be hard to achieve because that's what we want our teams to be doing. So at level 1, the criteria that explains that a team is at level stage 1, you might call it, is, as an example, a lack of customer segmentation. If you don't understand the difference between new and returning customers and what they're valuing, what they're doing, or different age brackets within a customer set, if you don't have that, you're really going to struggle to be data driven. All the way up to level 5. And as an example, and I expect many criteria to be in here, level 5, the example is we have regular insight sessions. Regular to that team might be weekly, bi-weekly, once a month, whatever that might be. But we are showing that we're data driven because we have regular insight sessions. The actions then that come as part of each level are the things that team might have identified they might want to do to move up the levels. So as an example, at level 1, if a team doesn't particularly have strong customer segmentation, what they might have identified actually is they need a bit of capability development. They need maybe some external training. They might need an expert to come in and to help them to understand what their customer segments might look like, among many other actions as well that the team have identified. Then we go all the way up to level 5. If we're having regular insight sessions, this is a fantastic thing to have. How can we make it even more impactful? How might we improve? Or how might we just maintain this really great action that we've already got? Well, actually, with a regular insight session, you might just want a rotating lead. You might want to say, okay, well, for the past couple of months, it's been the product designer that's been leading these insight sessions. Now it's going to be the QA. We're going to rotate around every quarter to lead these insight sessions so that every member of the cross-functional team is part of it. And then finally, we have a score. So the score is really just 1, 3, or 5. Where do we think we sit? Here, this team, in this example, sits at level 3. They have some user frameworks, they're understanding value in a framework, and they're starting to kind of pull on some certain levers there. But actually, they could be doing a lot better. And what they've identified is they just need an accountable individual to say, actually, we're going to use our frameworks every single time. We're really going to learn and lean into these frameworks. And every time we're going to understand customer value using them. I will be the accountable individual to do that for the next few months. And that will move them up the levels, again, among many other actions. The score itself, as you can imagine, the highest score for each principle is 5. That means that the score across all of customer is a total of 15. And as a pillar for strategically aligned or for value driven in this example is also a total of 15. The scoring is kind of arbitrary. Again, it's about the value of the conversation that's being had. Why does this team think they're a 3? Why is it important to say that they are sitting here? And also, when you look across the whole matrix, you can start to identify some gaps in the team. So using this example here, actually this team's pretty good in the business space. They're also quite strategically aligned. They've got a little bit of work to do in the outcome focused space, and within value driven and their approach, they're doing okay. They could also improve a little bit. The real challenge for this particular team using this example is in the customer space. As they've gone through and marked themselves at what level they're at when it comes to being user-centered, being data-driven, and having a really good, strong customer feedback loop and customer research function to their team, they're scoring really low. So how do we make them more effective in that space? How do we get them to score more of the goals from the experiments and features they've launched? You can see here straight away that a 5 is quite a low score. That's a couple of 3s. So that's a 1, a 3, and a couple of 1s in there. So that's really challenging for them. And it may be that some of those actions they need to really focus on. When you're able to identify that this team in particular is really strong on the business, and the second team, the third team, the fifth team are actually weaker on the business, we can now scale this effective team. We can now say, hey, a couple of team members from your team, go and work with team 1, 2, and 3, because they're really struggling on the business side and you are super strong. Let's find out why, and now let's scale that. So that was the matrix. I just want to give you a little bit of a wrap up because I think it's really important to make it clear that I'm not saying we shouldn't focus on efficiencies. Our team should be efficient. We should be accountable for thinking about how we improve that and take more shots on goal, but it'll only get us so far. We also really need to be thinking about how effective our teams are. And I think this is a space that most ops teams, most product leadership teams don't think about as much. We want to be able to maximize the efficiency gains. And if we think about how our teams are being effective and try to improve them before we think about how efficient we are, then it really will maximize those gains. The reality is, as I've just mentioned, that self-driven continuous improvement, when we're thinking about sustainable change, that's the way that it'll get us there. So thank you very much. I would definitely say, please feel free to scan this QR code. You will be able to request a download for the product capability matrix. Equally, you can go to my website, ndxcc.com/matrix. Or if you want to talk a little bit further about this particular framework or some of the other services I offer, or to even run a workshop with you and within your company around this exact framework, then please feel free to get in contact with me. And yeah, thank you very much. It's been great.
Thank you very much, Chris, for all the insights shared. There are quite some topics in the chat and a few questions over there. So I would suggest us to stop the recording and move on to the discussion.